The Buzzard Mobile lands in Atlanta, Georgia to feast over the largest civilian cemetery in the southeast, Westview Cemetery. With a staggering 600 acres, 125,000 plus burials, miles of roads, no one knows this rolling land quite like historian and author Jeff Clemmons. During our exploration, Jeff generously guides us over the vast acreage, plethora of grave sites, along with priceless behind-the-scene views of Asa Candler's grand cemetery design on this episode of Grave Talks with Shannon Scott.
My name is Jeff Clemmons. I'm the Director of Administration out at Westview.
And you're also an author with a book that you published about Westview Cemetery, correct?
That's correct.
And when was that published?
So the book came out in 2018, and it was actually an accident. I never thought about working at Westview. I never thought about writing a book about Westview. I wrote a book on Rich's Department Store, which is a huge chain here in Atlanta.
Sure.
And a lot of the founders are buried at our maybe more famous cemetery, Oakland. And I went out and visited them at the time I was working for a large law firm in the city and said, I need to go out and see Dick Rich, who was the president out at Westview. People had told me that there was this huge cemetery, and I was thinking, okay, yeah, sure there is. And then, of course, when I came out here, so I moved here in 1986. This was 2014, my first time out here.
Wow.
And I drove out here, and my mouth literally dropped open. It's a massive cemetery.
I had the same experience, and for the record, it's the largest private cemetery in the United States, correct?
One of them.
One of them. Okay.
The largest cemetery in the southeast for civilians.
For civilians.
That's a little larger for military, but it has some acreage that's not usable for graves.
Understood. And that's what you said, 582 acres?
582, right around 582 acres.
Wow. And the burial population is about what?
So of those 582 acres, only about half have been developed. So we still have almost 300 acres that we can use. On the current 200 and some odd acres that have been developed, we have over 125,000 residents.
Wow. And that's the population of many cities in a way. Wow. So it is literally a city of the dead. And what year was it founded?
So Westview was founded in 1884, October of 1884.
So true Victorian cemetery in that respect. And speaking of which, we're near the original entrance, which I know is basically unused today, but it's just such a beautiful, dare we say almost like medieval-like structure. When was it built exactly?
So this cemetery and the cemetery itself started as a result of Oakland and downtown being full. Oakland's 47 acres. It filled up very, very quickly in about 30 years. So it started in 1850. So by 1884, the city realized they needed more land to build. So originally This was supposed to be a city-funded or city-run cemetery. And then you got a private group of people that said, you know what, we can actually do that better than the city. Imagine that. And so it became a private group. In 1884, they scouted all this farm out here. This was the site of one of the battles during the Civil War, one of the three that caused Atlanta to fall. But they came out here, started this cemetery. It is different than Oakland, and this is a lawn park cemetery. Oakland is a garden cemetery.
Yeah.
So there are differences. And of course, you get into later history at Westview, and you get the memorial style cemetery also here. It's the first place in Georgia where that happened.
Gotcha.
In California. But the gatehouse itself is one of Atlanta's oldest still intact buildings, built in 1890. So originally you went downtown to buy your lots, and you only came out here to see the sexton, to use the restrooms, or whatever the case may be. The gatehouse, all the stone was clad from the property. There are rock quarries on the property. But it is, like you said, Renaissance. It's a Romanesque revival structure.
Sure.
Built in 1890 by Walter T. Downing. Downing is the architect.
Gotcha.
He did a lot of stuff here in Atlanta. But It's much bigger than it looks on the inside.
Yeah.
The superintendent's office still has the original marble fireplaces, the spider glass windows. And of course, we do have the original tile roof that's not on the structure right now. Storage. So we hope to reopen this as sort of a whistle stop for ADA compliant bathrooms and a
Yeah.
museum for the cemetery.
Of course,
It's actually
that's
a lot larger.
beautiful vision. Now, can we get a little behind the scenes peek?
Absolutely.
All right, let's take a walk.
Okay. One thing to notice are these incredible 1890s hinges. You don't see craftsmanship like that anymore.
Yeah, of course, of course.
So this would have been open to the public. So through this, the door to your left would have been into the waiting room where the guests would stand. There was a restroom here for people to use, and of course the ladder up to the belfry as well.
And was there a true bell ringer? That whose role was the bell ringer?
Not a
Okay.
person to do that. It was
Gotcha.
probably the sexton or the superintendent on. But the great thing about the bell is not only did it toll for the dead, but when we had greenhouse operations here in 1891, they were huge. They were 3 football fields in size.
Yeah.
The workers at the greenhouse and on the grounds had a number of rings of the bell attached to their name. So if the bell rang maybe 4 times and that was your number, that meant you had a phone call. You could come up to the office and take the phone call.
How about that? And just a kind of a nitty gritty detail question. Do you know where the bell was made?
I do. It's McShane Bell Foundry.
Okay.
It's in up north, I think Massachusetts. Don't hold me to that. but
Sure.
it's McShane Foundry in 1890. And it
Wow.
still works, and it's that's all stamped on the bell.
That's wonderful. Wonderful. I'm so glad it's still here. Well, great. Well, let's carry on.
Okay.
Here.
So if you were to go outside and look at this building, you'll see the stone is 2 different colors. On each end, Asa Canary Jr. moved the offices out here in 1930, and he added on additions. So what we're standing in now is one of the additions that Chandler added to the original structure.
I see.
So that's what this was, and it was used for offices.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
So, and then the original, I did not bring my flashlight. You hear things on the wall, don't be freaking.
We won't. We won't.
So this is the original superintendent's office.
Wow.
So you have the incredible spider glass, lead glass window that still exists. We do have plans to hopefully refurbish it. It's just covered up from the street with plywood. And you look over here, it's the original marble fireplace for the superintendent's office.
Wow. With what looks to be a couple old phone books.
A couple of old phone books. There's no telling what you'll find in here. But it's an incredible space. Of course, they came in and did a drop ceiling when they did some additions. You can see some of the plaster work where the original door had gone out.
Ah, yeah. Wow.
The fact that it's still standing at Clemens is wonderful.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. Wow.
Flashlight here.
Yeah.
So this is where we hope to do a museum and a whistle stop as well for the future belt line that comes to Atlanta is right through here. But this is many functions over the years. It was originally a waiting room, and then in the 1940s, 50s, they added in this walk-in cooler here, so it was flowers. We had the Westview Floral Company.
Wow.
So now we're going to leave this one to be refurbished. But it actually would have been a cooler. And get my light on here. You can actually see the plate glass window on the street. It was at Westview Flower Shop.
Neat.
Westview Flower Company.
That's so neat.
They did wholesale as well as for the ground here as well.
Incredible, incredible. Wow.
It's really cool. So we're gonna, of course, scrape all this out and leave this as a display.
As you should, as you should. That's remarkable.
Mid-century lamps. Leave our place. And then if you want that was going on the street, which was added later, when it was originally built in 1890, there was no access from the street into the gate. So you had to come in through the gate, which was the original entrance to these doors on the back.
I see, I see. It's great. You still got an original desk in here too. Some filing cabinets, yeah.
It's actually done in 3 parts. And this section was added later to expand the bathroom and office spaces.
So this was a real true visitor center. Yeah. Wow.
Bathrooms. Of course, they came in and put these incredible early mid-century 1940s
Wow.
lighting, which we still have. And then behind you was where a lot of the paperwork for the lot funeral was stored. It's actually a much bigger room than it looks, but this is where we hope to eventually have a community room.
Aha. Oh, yeah.
As well. So
And those lamp fixtures are insanely beautiful. Wow. Straight out of a movie. Straight out of a movie.
A phenomenal space.
Well, Jeff, thanks so much for that behind-the-scenes tour of the old caretaker. I mean, we're not calling that the caretaker facility. What would be the official name for the building?
The gatehouse.
The gatehouse. Fair enough. Thank you. The gatehouse. The stone itself that it was comprised of, or is comprised of, where was that quarried?
It's actually quarried here on site. Even the stone at the Abbey, which we'll go to a little later, was all quarried on site. So saved an awful lot of money.
That's amazing.
Stone here. People don't forget too, is Stone Mountain, while it seems a long way away from here, you only see the tip.
Right.
A really huge granite structure.
Yeah.
Actually, Stone Mountain runs all the way underneath Atlanta, like all through this area. So you get that level of granite. And that's where pouring these out of the quarry sites.
Well, that's we might call it a very self-sufficient cemetery then.
Tried, safe.
And did the quarry workers live here on site, or they just came from in
They
the
did
neighborhood?
They did not live on site. There were at one time 7 tenement houses on the property.
Okay.
There was a working farm, and there was a large superintendent on the superintendent house.
Right.
They also had a master of the hounds,
Yeah.
who I'm not really sure what he did. But there were a lot of people out here working. The stone cutters probably were brought in just to cut the stone for the purpose of the building.
Sure. Before the Westview Cemetery was a cemetery, and it was really a rural farmland, this was a scene of what we call it a major Civil War battle. Okay.
Yeah. So there were, in Atlanta, for the fall of Atlanta in 1864, there were 3 major battles. This was the last of those 3 battles. The difference is that this battle that was fought on the northern end of the property here was not planned. So you had the first battle was the Battle of Peachtree Creek, which was planned. Then you had the Battle of Atlanta, the actual Battle of Atlanta, which was over in East Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And then between that time, they were trying to figure out what to do. And you had a Confederate group that was marching west and south. They came upon at the battle at Ezra Church, which was a small Methodist meeting house just by way of the Crow, not far from here at all. The Confederates came upon some Union soldiers and decided basically not to wait for orders or listen to orders, and attacked the Union soldiers. It was a bloodbath. More than 4,000 individuals were killed in that battle. I-20 basically runs over the top of that battle line. But a lot of the Confederacy's cavalry and all was staged on what's now Westview Cemetery grounds. Then what had happened, or what's interesting is that in 1961, they had a big grand hoo-ha out here, bringing about a Confederate soldier out here, because there are trenches still on the property. They buried this Confederate soldier and had bands and all, only to realize years later when I did the book that they're actually Union trenches, not Confederate trenches. Because this battle wasn't planned, there were no trench works in this area. So the Union built trenches in here and prevented the Confederates from taking this land. And then just a couple of days later, they went down to Jonesboro, the city of Atlanta fell, and Sherman came through and started the march to Savannah.
Wow. And yeah, we know how that worked out. So you also mentioned that it was very notable that some of these soldiers, or a number of the soldiers buried in Oakland Cemetery, Atlanta, were here first.
That's correct. Yeah. So a lot of the people, we get people that say there's mass graves out here for Confederate dead. That's not true.
Okay.
There were a lot of people buried out here during the war. They were buried on site.
Mm-hmm.
You can go back and read some of the descriptions of the battlefield and how it's flowing with blood, creek nearby. So they buried a lot of people on site out of necessity. But in the 1870s, you had a women's group that came out and moved all those soldiers and moved these soldiers to Oakland Cemetery, to the unknown grave there.
Gotcha.
Where we're standing now, it's about 240 odd soldiers for the Confederacy, and then the monument behind me was erected in 1889, and it was erected before the actual gatehouse here. So it's really one of the oldest structures here. The top is a dime a dozen soldier from Italy. If you're Italy, you're selling Union to the north, Confederate to the south. The bottom was incredible from an art perspective.
Sure.
Regardless, of politics.
Right.
It was monolithic limestone from Stone Mountain that was carved by a local guy by the name of J.J. Mullins. It had some really intricate details on it, but it was sadly destroyed a couple of years ago. People that came out and vandalized it, some other things on it. on the cemetery.
Understood, as it has happened. Sure, Savannah faced the same challenges. But, and this also, it's like this, he is overlooking the soldier, the officer is looking over some of the actual battlefield itself, right?
Correct. Yeah, there'd be all that northern edge, and the trees weren't there. You can hear the roar of I-20 in the background.
For sure.
But back in there. Of course, the ironic and beautiful thing is we have Union soldiers here as well.
Yes, yes.
Not buried in this spot, but out on the grounds as well as other soldiers from basically everywhere we've had.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's part of the layers of these places. Neat. Yeah, I was always curious about why there was a combination lock on this door and then the one above, which also is a combination lock. So both of these were safes inside of the structure.
They were inside a building. So the administration building, Westview at one time, for its size, I don't know why you'd need 3 administration buildings, but they had at 1.3 administration buildings.
Wow.
The gatehouse, the one that was built around this, at the same time the one at the Abbey was being.
I see. And so did he keep some of the trophies inside of these rooms?
He kept the trophies in there. School children would come out and do tour groups to that. They'd also tour the greenhouses. And then in 1973-74, when they tore down this structure, they gifted most of the taxidermy to animals to Fernbank Science Museum in Atlanta.
Neat. And Jeff, final question. How tall is the tower itself?
Knew you were probably going to ask that. I want to say 150 feet, but I
Sure.
could be wrong.
Let's go ahead and I'm going to pan up here.
It's a great structure. The U.S. government, there's a geodactic survey marker up there that the government uses to triangulate planes and all in the eastern seaboard.
Neat. We'll try to capture that. Well, thanks for the highlights on this. We appreciate it. I find that part and parcel to a lot of Victorian cemeteries in American history are not only receiving vaults, holding vaults, but in some cases when there were pandemics in large cities, epidemics, they needed even a more significant kind of area or facility to house bodies. How would you quantify this receiving vault behind you?
So the receiving vault behind me is an interesting structure. Built in 1888 to the side of a hill. It is granite and marble. There would have been marble doors where the plaque is at now. But it was built, it's not uncommon, but it's not terribly common to see receiving vaults in the South. They played much more an important role up north when the ground was frozen and you couldn't dig the ground to bury a body. For here in Atlanta, because Westview was so large, people, of course, didn't have automobiles at the time. The roads out here were chert and dirt, things of that nature. You would ride the trolley to the gatehouse, and then we had a horse and buggy originally, and then a station wagon that would bring people out and it would drop you off. So when the ground wasn't traversable because of mud, rain, or even the occasional ice and snow that we might get here, they would store the body in what's behind me, the receiving vault. It holds, depending upon what sources you look at, between 35 and 50 bodies. 35 is probably a little more accurate.
Gotcha.
Incredible. I mean, a total side note is that the holly that goes around it was actually discovered here on the property by Thomas Burford, who had actually worked for Queen Victoria at Windsor Castle, and then came to Connecticut, and then came down to Atlanta in 1895 and got a seedling from Washington, D.C. Chinese, and propagated this seedling or sport, and basically started the Burford holly, which is now sold the world over. So
wow.
There's a lot of these. The mother trees have been lost. That's a side story, but
Well, it's amazing. It's amazing.
There's a good place to see them. The vault itself was used until 1945 when they built the Abbey. They no longer needed a temporary storage place for bodies. The Abbey is huge, so there's plenty of space. What's interesting is that you had, and not to talk bad about other historians, but Franklin Garrett, who's the father of sort of Atlanta history, did a lot of his research just off of newspapers. And so the tablet behind me talks about the Spanish influenza that came through town and ravaged, and that there were tons of bodies stored here. That's actually not correct. We don't have any evidence on our records. We have all the records of everyone buried permanently or temporarily back to October 9th, 1884, our first burial with Helen Haskins. So there's nothing to back that claim up.
Gotcha.
And also the Spanish influenza really hit Atlanta a year after the rest of the United States.
I see.
It was sort of spared. So it was really here in the winter of 1918.
Gotcha.
But it's an interesting place. I don't know what it looks like on the inside. None of us do. Well, we don't know if there's any shelves. There's no known photographs of the inside. So if anybody watching has them, please send them to us.
Yeah.
Because I'd love to see. Otherwise, the slab's got to come down, and I don't think that's going to happen. anytime soon.
Right. Wow. And what would you estimate the square footage in there? Do they know? How far back does it go?
That I really don't have a good answer.
Okay, that's fine. Would you estimate that these apses, they had lanterns inside of it one time?
Decorative pieces at one time.
Decorative pieces?
But
Okay.
there wasn't really anything. I think there were vases at one time
Sure.
put in here. I do know that behind that plaque was a marble door, marble
Wow.
bronze door. We don't know if it's still there and just behind the plaque or
Sure.
removed.
Yeah.
But it obviously would have opened back and forth to allow
Sure.
storage of bodies.
It's probably a part of some mansion on West Paces Ferry.
Entirely possible. Entirely possible that it is.
Great. That's amazing. So, Jeff, it's no mystery that Atlanta is the holy city of Coca-Cola. And here we are at maybe the grave of the high priest himself, Asa Chandler, his wife, obviously, Lucy, and children and other relatives. So what can you tell us a little bit about the Chandler legacy, the Coca-Cola connection, tying in with Westview, let's say?
So it was actually the death of Asa Sr. here that we believe sort of piqued Asa Jr.'s interest. So he died in 29. Right at that time, Jr. decides, I'm going to get to the cemetery business. And there's a lot of reasons why that happened. But he, then Asa Jr., his son, comes in and buys the cemetery sort of under the radar and lets the Adair brothers run it for a few years. And then he takes full control and runs it to 52. So that's how Jr. got involved. What's great about Griggs, of course, Coca-Cola, he bought the formula from John Pemberton, who actually created Coca-Cola. It was all during when you had Prohibition, so they needed a tonic for headaches, things of that nature.
Sure.
He turned it into a U.S. juggernaut, if you will. And then they sold, and all of his kids got basically $75 million apiece in today's money. So that
Wow.
was Asa Canary Jr. So what better way to spend that inheritance but on a cemetery, among other things? I mean, we have Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport exists because it was the race car track for Junior, and he didn't make a go at it. Had his dad come in and bail him out of it, and they turned it into an airplane field, and it became Hartsfield-Jackson.
Sure.
But what's unique about this monument is this is very indicative of the lawn park style cemetery. So you had, instead of every person having individual big stones, you had a large family center stone, and then each person got individual foot or headstones.
Sure.
These are called pillow markers, and for the very reason that they just look like pillows. But quite interesting, this is granite. The obelisk itself, of course, was quite controversial. It was pagan at one time. Then the Catholic Church, of course, goes and gets them a big obelisk from Egypt, sticks it in the arms of the church, puts a cross on the top of it. Boom, it's magical and wonderful, and it's Christianity's greatness. So it became very popular in the 1800s. What's unique about this obelisk is it has the cloth draped over the top of it, and that symbolizes a life cut too short.
Yes, the veil, the muted life, the life silenced. And, you know, I tell people about this, but there is a history in the 19th century of like church ladies getting together, sewing banners, standing in cemeteries and protesting that the pagan era objects are being raised in the Christian cemetery, landscape, which is probably a little overkill, but it did happen. Was there any such thing like that in Westview or that you can speak to?
We don't have any documented cases of that happening. We do have documented cases of gunfights happening between criminals and the police out here from Atlanta, running through these tombstones in the 1890s. And there was some great, trying to get grave bodies or steal the jewelry perhaps somebody left on the ground.
Yes, the resurrection men.
We don't have any real protests.
Gotcha.
To speak of with that.
Fair enough. Well, a little peek into some of the Coca-Cola founder life. Thank you. You're no stranger to the fact that Victorian cemeteries are really outdoor art museums, that a part of their excitement, the rumor in town was that a great sculptor had unveiled something in the cemetery. And of course, I know there are famous sculptors that have added things across Westview Cemetery, but arguably one of the most famous is the Connecticut sculptor Daniel Chester French. He famously did the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., the Oglethorpe statue in Savannah, Georgia in 1911. And here we are with one of his creations that I believe you said was called Achievement. And what can you tell us about it?
So Achievement is the official name. Daniel Chester French called it Achievement. It's also known sort of colloquially, I guess, as the Williams Monument. It was created for Jesse Parker Williams. His wife approached Daniel Chester French, had it commissioned. They were extremely wealthy. He was the president of the Florida, Georgia, and Alabama Railroads. And when he died in 1913, something which was unheard of at the time, his wife took over and ran as president of the railroads at the time. So she reached out and had this done. Bacon did the base, the surround, and Daniel Chester French designed the statue in clay up in Connecticut. We just found out the model. A little bit of history. She's from mixed race ancestry, which I love. So,
she was an exotic model.
She was an exotic model, and she was very, very well known. Her name was Nettie Anderson. She was used a lot as a muse by not just French, but several other artists. And it was interesting, her family sort of shunned her sometimes because she posed nude for these sculptures and all. But her face, her visage can be found all over the country, and it's extremely important works of art.
Sure.
Everywhere. It's an incredible sculpture, though. It is Tate, Georgia marble. It was quarried. Westview actually sits in an ideal place. Tate, Georgia is about an hour from here. And Elberton granite, the granite capital of the world, as they say, is about an hour and a half from here. So we're ideally located. I think what people don't realize is while Daniel Chester French actually created this, he didn't actually carve this per se.
Huh.
He hired, he would do the clay models and all, and he hired, the same with the Washington Monument, is he hired the Piccirilli, if I said that right, the Piccirilli brothers. They were very well known in New York. And a family member specialized in robe, folds, the other one in hands, the other in face, and they all worked on this together.
Wow.
So they actually came out. So between 1914 and when it was finally finished, 1917 was set up. But it is our most famous monument.
And so 1917 is the kind of unveiling hour. Wow. Well, it is exquisite, and I love that she has these sort of extending victory wreaths that she's holding out. And any other like symbols on the monument that you find noteworthy?
There's a lot. You can go into all the details on it. The greatest thing we like to point out is this is Mr. and Mrs. Williams, Cora, and Jesse, and so they're sort of carved into the side here.
Sure.
But there are lots of meanings about the winged globe, victory wings, the laurel wreath, and you can get into all the symbology if you want. This is actually signed. The Smithsonian has been down here and found the signature. This is one of two of French's statues here in Atlanta. There is another one up on Peachtree Street outside this CSX corporate headquarters.
Okay.
But a little controversial because it was of a guy that was in the Confederate Army.
I see.
So it's sort of negative attention.
I see. Wow. Tell us about the unique area we are at, currently in Westview.
We're in an area known where the Irish travelers, or pejoratively called gypsies, but they're Irish travelers. They still exist. They originally were in Ireland. They moved to Washington, D.C. I always get it wrong, right before or right after the potato famine. They moved there. They opened a livery business there, but it didn't work out so well. So the family split into three main branches. One of them came to Atlanta, and they started doing livestock sales. So they sold mules and horses. They were sort of intermixed their own group. They were Irish. They spoke Gaelic, not a lot of English. They intermarried. And they were nomadic travelers. So when they had headquarters in Atlanta, one in Birmingham, one down in Texas. But during the rest of the year, they traveled first on horse and buggy, and they lived in tents. Of course, living in tents, they had four-poster mahogany beds and 8 Haviland china. But sold a lot of horses. Then over the years, they went into trailers and travel trailers and that, but we're nomadic. But what makes unique at Westview, almost all the angel sculptures in the cemetery are from the Irish travelers. And they originally were burying over at Oakland. But what was unique is that they did burials once a year and weddings once a year. So they would have a wedding at the Catholic Church downtown Atlanta. Then they would come all out in caravan to the cemetery and do mass funerals on the same day.
Same day.
If you died the day after, you were kept on ice until the next year. So you were kept, not really on ice, but you were kept in storage, for lack of a better term, until the next season came around.
Wow.
And, so quite an interesting group of people. They've settled in Augusta, so North Augusta. If you get Murphy's Village is where they settled in the 1970s, so not so nomadic anymore. But quite an interesting group of people. That contrasts with, they don't like to be called gypsies, it's pejorative for them, but we do have the Roma gypsies here on site. We have the king of the gypsy. And so Roma gypsies were originally from England and Eastern Europe, and then were persecuted in World War II came to the United States and settled across the South and other places. And so they come out here. So you'll see food out somewhere. You might see a dead chicken hanging off the front gate.
Yeah.
And that's usually one of their
the traditions, the old traditions. Well, you realize that started to sound like an American version of Peaky Blinders. I love it. I mean, I feel like that's
fascinating group. And
yeah.
They would have, and then they'd have a mass picnic out here. So you could bury 25 people in one day, all at one time. The Associated Press has photographs of this. I mean, they were huge events, and then they would set up a big camp not far from here and do horse shows and all that kind of stuff. They're incredible. That's the Irish.
Right, and they consider themselves Catholic?
Very much.
I see. Like Roman Catholic or I mean, how
that's
quantify
a good
that?
question.
It sounds like some of their traditions are so old world that
They are.
it's almost like dipping back into like, paganism of Ireland and things like that with a little bit of the Christian then following up.
And definitely speaking Gaelic and broken English. You didn't marry outside the clan. Girls didn't go to school. Guys went to school, but not for very long, and then they got into the business. So it was a business oriented.
Wow, just industrious people and always staying close to the land and their kind. Wow, that's just fascinating. You mentioned that we're kind of in a costlier section of the cemetery today, but you discovered that this was originally the pauper section, correct? Is that?
So now everybody thinks of A1, the section we're in, is sort of the creme de la creme when it comes to money and buying lots. You've got the Woodruffs that are buried in here. You've got the Lay family for Lay's potato chips, which a lot of people don't think came from Atlanta. You have a lot of other famous Atlantans in here as well. But what people didn't realize, this little corner that we're standing on, was for 3 months, the pauper section.
For 3 months.
So after they opened the cemetery in October of 1884, 3 months later, they went into business with the city of Atlanta to do the city of Atlanta paupers. So they moved the pauper fields from here over to a different section.
Sure.
It has over 5,000 people.
Wow.
So a lot of people mistake these little stones, but this is actually Westview's first celebrity by accident.
This was Westview's first celebrity.
Yeah.
And J.W. Pierce of Texas.
Yeah, so J.W. Pierce was a cattle rancher. He was in Atlanta buying cattle, was going home, was killed on a train in Austell, Georgia, which was not horrible, but not big news. But the big news was as a woman out of Ohio came and claimed that it was her husband, and then a woman out of Texas came and claimed it was her husband. They dug the poor man up 3 different times to look at him, had the same malformed toes and the same malformation on the neck. But you get into a long drawn-out story. It ends up being in newspapers across the country about whose wife or whose husband does this guy actually belong to.
Sure.
The woman in Ohio says, no, it's mine. And the woman in Texas is like, you're out of your mind. It's my husband. And it's just, you can go look at national newspapers and it's everywhere talking.
Well, let me ask you this. Was it because he had money?
No. It's an even better story. He did have money. He was very wealthy. But what happened was the woman in Ohio's husband had absconded her and left and moved to Texas and had heard of this gentleman's name, had left his wife and was living with his mistress. Came to Atlanta and knew that this guy was here on business in Atlanta. He had taken his name, had used that name. So when he saw the newspaper article that J.W. had been killed on the train here in Atlanta, he wrote a note to his wife in Ohio and said, I've been dead. This person's been dead. So she thought it was him, only to find out it was this other guy acting as him. And so they eventually found him in Chattanooga and arrested him for bigamy and ended this sort of national trial. But it's this nuts story that you get. And it's this very unassuming little stone out here.
Wow.
But it's pretty cool.
Well, I'm not sure if that makes soap operas sound boring or these are the original inspirations for soap operas.
Might be a little bit, yeah. And it's a very interesting person, though. And she never moved him. So finally the court settled with the woman in Texas. It's her husband.
Wow.
But for whatever reason, he was never moved from here.
Wow. Well, there's something about, I guess, honoring the dead where they are. And so this is 1883, is that correct?
1885.
1885.
After the cemetery.
Oh, well, J.H. Pierce? Or J.W. Pierce. J.W. Pierce. Well, J.W. Pierce, I wish I could have known you and had a good conversation with you, but you make good posthumous conversation.
Quite a stand, that's for sure.
That's amazing. That's amazing. We've arrived at the gravesite of a very notable author, who also had a Savannah connection for a time as the editor of the Savannah Morning News, and that is Mr. Joel Chandler Harris here. And when he was in Savannah, he very much spent some time documenting the dialect of the Gullah Geechee people and adding some of that understanding and knowledge into the novels and stories he authored. But, what can you tell us about Joel Chandler Harris through your lens?
So through our lens, Joel Chandler Harris, we have lots of famous people buried on the property, from Academy Award winners to silent screen actresses, novelists, James Dickey's brothers here. But Joel Chandler Harris is probably the most famous author we have. Not the only one, but the most famous. I mean,
Sure.
in his day, he was only second to Mark Twain.
For sure.
Popularity. People forget that West End Atlanta, which we're very close to, it's about a mile and a half from here, was Buckhead of Atlanta before Buckhead. All the wealthy lived in West End. And so if you go to Wren's Nest, where he lives, it's a mile and a half from here.
Exquisite house.
It's a beautiful
The
house.
Wren's
It's
Nest,
incredible.
yeah.
And it's where he wrote a lot of his story, Briar Rabbit, Tar Baby, Song of the South. He's somewhat of a controversial figure now, seen through a lens of racism or not racism.
Yeah.
I equate some of that to Song of the South premiered here at the Fox Theater in Atlanta at a time, and Disney did that, and they're the ones that really sort of changed the narrative on that movie and changed, from an African American singing and slavery out in the fields, as opposed to not really what Joel Chandler Harris was doing, and he was writing down the stories of the slaves that he had heard growing up.
Sure.
So there was sort of that change, and he's, in my opinion, been a little maligned through the years. But an interesting person nonetheless.
Yeah.
Has a fascinating life and an incredible literary history. I mean, it's a
Yeah, and I think it's neat too that Savannah's Johnny Mercer, did Zippity Doodah. So I just love these connections between the cities and the cemeteries, and of course Joel Chandler Harris very much had that, and amazing gravesite, and the type of stone.
So we call it's just a granite boulder. It's
A granite boulder.
We no longer allow this type of stone in the cemetery.
I'm a little upset because that's what I was going to go for, just so you know.
I like it. The problem was is oftentimes was sold and it hid cracks and it hid faults in the stone. So over the years, we have some of our sculptures out here, the fingers pop off and all. People
Sure.
think it's vandals. It's not. It's tiny hairline cracks. The water gets in, it freezes and pops the fingers off. Thing with this, so they don't allow this anymore. This actually wasn't put up until almost 10 years after his death.
I see.
His son.
And who raised it?
It was the son.
His
the
son?
family that did it. Yeah. And so when he died, what's great is they had school children from Atlanta line the streets from his house all the way to the gravesite. Had that service here.
And so he's born 1849. He died 1908.
1908.
Fair enough. Do you know who did?
10 years, maybe 2 years. I think this was done in 1910.
Okay. And you know who did the relief of the face? No. Okay. It's a great likeness.
It is a great likeness. I have an idea who it is, and of course their name is escaped me. But
It's fair. It's fair. Well, Joel Chandler Harris, I am your envy as a storyteller. It's neat to at least meet you here at your grave. I'm fond of telling people that when it comes to cemeteries, you can never judge the book by the cover, and there's much more than meets the eye with cemeteries, particularly in respect to unmarked graves or lost graves. And sometimes that's the best way to lose a story, hide a story. But you mentioned that you're drawn to the story of a Russian princess that found her way to Westview. What is that story?
it's quite an interesting story, not very well known. Dubious accounts if she's a princess, Russian, Prussian, but she was born into a German ducal family, married someone, her name is Mina von Zeldika, if I pronounce it right. Don't hate me for those of you that speak Russian. But she married into someone who worked for Tsar Nicholas. And when Tsar Nicholas passed away, her husband offended Tsar Nicholas II. And so he had to leave Russia very quickly. So they left Russia with their children and they moved to New York City. He had issues with, I guess, the move and, sort of being hunted perhaps. And so he developed alcoholism, ended up dying of alcoholism in the bathtub in New York. Then
Wow.
an older son, ran off with a showgirl against the mother's wishes. So the story goes that she traveled all over the country and spent years living in different cities trying to find her son. This is in the late 1800s. She comes to Atlanta. She ends up settling here. She's much older in age. She's still trying to find him here. Never finds him, sadly, but wants to be buried in an unmarked grave. So we're in a single grave section, section 3. These graves go back to the 1880s, 1890s. This particular grave, she specifically requested that she come out on a coach of 6 white horses in a white casket, wrapped in a white robe, white velvet crepe on the inside. And then when they got to the grave, she insisted that they pierce her heart with a wooden stick, so that she would not be buried alive, because people were afraid of being buried alive sometimes at that point. So they did all that here and then buried her with great fanfare here in this section. And of course, there's no headstone or footstone, so she's been forgotten about all these years. So you come out here and you see this empty grass, and you think it's that.
Why do you think Princess Zeldika made the request to be buried in an unmarked grave with a semi-elaborate ceremony, a semi-symbolic ceremony of maybe chastity, purity, Christianity, with all the, I don't want to say fanfare, but all the decoration of the funeral? Why the unmarked grave part? What's your interpretation? What have you found?
My interpretation, for what it's worth, I don't know anything, but I think it's sort of her final act. She couldn't find her son. Her husband committed suicide. She was displaced from Russia. So she had all these things working against her. And I think it was sort of her way of just sort of going out, just disappearing, if you will.
I see.
In the ground and not being remembered, maybe for her heartache or her trouble. But I think
Sure.
kind of that. It's just unmarked and sort of forgotten. Kind of
Sure.
like it felt like she was forgotten.
Wow, that's powerful. And so the grave, estimated to be here, just under grass, blades of grass. We're here with a very interesting character called Little Mab, who was the French circus star Adrien Esmolaire. And am I correct in thinking that you all, or some faction of your group or Westview, donated the headstone to him?
We did. We at the cemetery provided a headstone for him because we thought his story was so unique that we wanted it to be a focal point too, and to move people to this part of the cemetery. So this is an older single section. Babyland was on the other end of this. So not a lot of famous people out here, if you will. I found Little Mab by accident when I was doing some research, and there was no marker out here. We actually put a little flat one, and then when I started working out here, we went to this and did his actual life size, 27 inches. Interestingly, I found him, for anybody that's American Horror Story fans, it was when Freak Show was running, and I was doing the research on this and discovered him by accident. But he worked with a lot of circuses in France, and came to the United States and worked for a lot of circuses here. But became particularly known the world over for traveling with a gentleman that was over 7 feet tall. Them made a duo. But there was a whole group of little people, or as they called him, Little Mab. Interesting person. But what's interesting is we talked about the Spanish influenza over the receiving ball.
Sure.
He is one of the ones that actually did die as a result of the Spanish influenza here in Atlanta. He was actually performing at a circus show over at Lakewood, where they used to do circuses. Got fever there, went into the hospital here, and passed here in Atlanta, and that's why he was buried here. Over time, there was an original little stone with French writing on it. That disappeared. We have no idea where it went to. But for years, there were newspaper articles about the circus troupe coming out here with the Siamese twins and all coming to visit Little Mab on the top of this hill.
Amazing.
And over time, he just kind of got forgotten about. So we actually reached out to his hometown in France, to the village, and the people there had no idea where he was buried. And so we were able to connect with them, and of course they're thrilled. An artisan over there had actually created a life-size replica of him in his outfit long before they saw this. So at some point we want to get them over here and maybe have an unveiling, if you will, of Little Mab. But
yeah,
it's quite interesting. He died, and supposedly was married to the fat lady, and she died of the Spanish influenza in Birmingham a couple of weeks before, I think.
Wow. And is she buried there?
That's a good question.
Okay, fair enough. Well, it's so neat that Little Mab has some representation. And are any sideshow performers or circus people coming to visit Little Mab, to your knowledge, or not yet? Or
not to my knowledge.
Could become a thing, huh?
It could become a thing. We have had increased traffic. We put this on. Find a Grave has come out, done some stuff. So
nice.
But it's a nice collection of stars to add to screen actresses and all that we have out here.
Well, what a beautiful gesture. I think it's just a wonderful, wonderful gift to the memory of Little Mab. We're sorry that the world lost you so early, but it's wonderful that you're here. Still kind of on the subject of unmarked graves and, the hidden secret stories, in a way, of cemeteries that happen for all kinds of reasons. We arrive here to the grave of a magician And his name was
Jose Cruz.
Jose Cruz. And he had a camaraderie, friendship, business dynamic to Asa Canary Jr.
That's correct.
of the Coca-Cola family.
Asa Canary Jr. was notorious for going into different things, hog wild. He would get all into something, whether it's shipyards or ships or the airport, or something, and then would just up and leave those. He went big time, and he was a huge magic collector. He had a magic collection at his mansion that supposedly rivaled some of the best in the country. When he was overseas in the Philippines, he met Jose Cruz, brought him back to the United States. He ended up moving on the property, bought his house, living there. This is the 1920s, 1930, and so Jose ends up falling in love with a white woman, which, of course, was frowned upon at that time. And so they were getting a lot of flack. Of course, unbeknownst to the girl he was dating, he had a family back in the Philippines. We're not sure he told her. But supposedly he was in love with this girl here. And so it's sort of an unsolved mystery. They found Jose Cruz in his car with the girl he was dating in his lap. He had shot her in the head and killed her and then killed himself there on Asa Candler's property.
Wow.
Asa Candler, of course, did not want, there was some news about it, but didn't want a lot of news out there. So he sort of, as Asa did, covered or quietly did things. So he had Jose brought out here and buried in an unmarked grave, and it was pretty much forgotten or stricken from the record, if you will. So he's sort of been forgotten over time. And what's interesting is just 3 weeks ago, a woman shows up from California with her husband, and it is Jose Cruz's granddaughter. They've never been out here, so I was able to bring them. So they put this wooden cross out of makeshift wood here to the grave.
Sure.
And it was interesting, and they helped illuminate some of the things. They confirmed that he was in fact married and had kids back in the Philippines.
Wow. Dramatic. And that's what keeps your job interesting.
Yeah, you never know who's going to walk in the door.
Right. Within just, Pandora's box of stuff. And pardon me, but what year was that roughly?
About 1930.
1930. Wow. What a tragic end to a romance, but it sounds like a little deception involved. And
it's sad. It's a sad story, but there's a book coming out on Chandler soon. It'll have that story and lots of others.
Interesting. Wow. That's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that. We're in the Exquisite Chapel of the Abbey structure inside of Westview Cemetery in Atlanta, which is just one of the most stunning structures in all of Atlanta, Georgia. But it's also kind of hidden away, and it always surprises people when they see this place because it's just so humongous. It's so magnificent. It's something straight out of Renaissance Italy. You don't expect it to be in South Atlanta or Atlanta at all. And I think it's just one of the most amazing cemetery, abbey, mausoleum type structures in the United States. So if I read this correctly, kind of in your book and also some of the Westview social media, Asa Canary Jr. made some kind of statement that he really wanted Westview to, and particularly the Abbey, to be like his life's greatest achievement. Is that fair?
Chandler is an interesting person to describe. Chandler was, I don't know if he was the black sheep of the family, but he was not his brother who took over Coca-Cola from his father. So his dad bought Coca-Cola and then ended up selling it to Woodruff. They tried to get Buddy Chandler, as they called him, Asa Jr., involved in Coca-Cola. So his father originally sent him to Los Angeles to run Coca-Cola in California. And of course, so he ended up spending more time at pool halls playing pool, and then he really did focusing on the business in California. So his dad, they brought him quietly back here. They shipped him off to North Georgia to run a mill up in North Georgia, and it was equally as disastrous there. So the family in some ways sort of just pushed him out of Coca-Cola.
I see.
At that point, they had gotten money. The kids got their money from inheritance. They basically got $75 million in today's money, but spending power back in the 1920s. And, he wasn't liked by everybody. He did a lot of things. He was impulsive. He had projects that he would start, complete, and not finish, and you're standing in one of them.
Right.
Westview Abbey started in 1943, October 43, or just a few months before that. We had gotten into World War II. He was going to build a big building like this at the start of World War II. The building in size, it's 500 feet by 300 feet, so that's a football field and a half by a football field across at its longest and widest points. We're actually on the middle level. There's 3 levels. The third level has not actually been completed. And the chapel that we're standing in was actually supposed to be the second largest chapel. There was going to be a chapel even larger than this one, which he did not end up building. We have the plans for that. I can show you what it was supposed to be, but this chapel was the middle-sized one. There was one in the back, which was never completed inside. And then this one, what happened, money, he got into trouble with state regulators. He was getting up in age, doing some things out at the cemetery that he had some class action lawsuits with people here. And to back up a little bit, Chandler, when he was in California, had gone to Forest Lawn and other cemeteries where Hubert Eaton had started the memorial park, which was flat graves with the bronze tops. Chandler liked that. He brought that to the south. He was the first person to bring that to the southeast. So Westview has 2 different styles. But what he also started doing is ripping up shrubberies and flattening headstones out here without getting landowners' permissions. So that caused a class action lawsuit. So we started to scale back on stuff. This chapel was originally supposed to have a coffered ceiling instead of a fan vault ceiling. To give you an idea of the size in here, those chandeliers that are above me are 6.5 feet tall. Gold and silver bronze. They're from Los Angeles. They actually brought them on a train. One of them, it was 3-tiered. They put it up, decided they didn't like the 3rd tier, took it apart, put 2 up, had the others fabricated. All of this looks like a Caen limestone or Jurassic limestone from Caen, France. It is not. It's poured concrete, poured on place to look like a limestone. The intricate stained glass windows cost $1.5 million in his day. And in the 1940s, they were installed and completed by 1948-49. They're done by the Los Angeles Art Glass Company in Los Angeles. And then there's more than 75 stained glass windows throughout the structure. Some of those were done by a local stained glass studio, Lorenz, and then the other was done by the Abbey, which is out in Conyers, Georgia. Before they made fruitcakes, they did stained glass windows. So we have a few of those here as well. Behind me in the Raritos, if I'm saying that correctly, the plaster walnuts altar behind me, those paintings are original. They're from Bartholomew Mako, who was a Hungarian painter who had settled in Los Angeles. Chandler got to know him because he did the artwork for Forest Lawn and all out there. He also did stuff for the 1930s Olympics. He was also an architect and a designer and sculptor, so he had a lot of things. But Chandler brought him here, had him spend a year painting those, and then put those up. There are others out in the nave and the narthex. I always get it confused, but there's more than 27 paintings in total. And I could bore you to death with all the names, but I won't. That's representation. They do need to be cleaned, but they are original to this area.
And so this sounds a little dismissive, but it sounds like this is Asa's sort of albatross, but a beautiful attempt at an albatross. It just, it was so overly ambitious, especially for the Depression era and then everything else that you're mentioning.
So like Chandler, everything was overly ambitious. He is a big personality.
Yeah.
He did things I think people probably would shake their heads at. Think he was nuts for doing that. But he was also notorious for walking away from stuff, which he did Westview Abbey as well. So he sold behind the scenes to 3 guys in D.C. and then the Bowen family, who currently owns the cemetery, bought it in 1952. But he left the Abbey incomplete.
Yeah.
So it took until the 1970s to get to the point that it is now.
Yeah.
The 3rd floor is still incomplete. But it was typical Chandler. It was typical what he did. And he changed things over time. So this was supposed to be his pyramid.
Right.
Sarcophagus here. He wanted to be buried. He had found God later in life.
Sure.
This religious conversion. So like the stained glass windows in here were not originally supposed to be religious in nature. They were supposed to be of the national parks across the country with waterfalls and things of that. He changed that design over time. What's ironic is that he named this chapel after his second wife, who had been his secretary. I actually ran the cemetery here, and her name was Florence Chandler. Her initials are carved above the door back there, but I'll tell you what she did with him and his burial a little later.
Okay.
It's interesting.
And then, of course, this is kind of exciting at a certain level, but in the TV series, the immensely popular TV series Ozark, this was the cartel boss's casa supposedly in Mexico. And I believe this is where you see a lot of the dining room table meetings between the different captains and or Jason Bateman And so did you have sort of a fly on the wall minute there?
There's a lot of people involved. Ozark was here quite a bit. We do a lot of movies out here.
Mhm.
It's great revenue for us that we
Sure.
can use. So they've
Yeah.
got Fast and Furious here. This was Navarro's living room. And you asked if I was a fly on the wall. I got to walk around with Laura Linney outside, and she scouted for scenes. But usually I'm not involved with the movies at all. That's
Sure.
the owner, Charles Bowen, and his son, Chase Bowen.
Right. Nice. Well, thanks for the introduction to the chapel. Let's take a tour of the larger property. We're in what you call the bridge room, which just has elaborate details. And again, it fools the eye. I mean, most people would not guess that this was not limestone, but, as you put it, poured concrete. And you said there are 35 types of marble in the property.
From Belgium, Italy, Alabama, you name it. We have the bill of lading for all that, the quarries it came from, trains that it was shipped here to. They didn't throw anything away here. So.
And let me ask you this. I mean, you've seen the insurance paperwork, I'm sure, on the place at some level. I mean, wild guess, what would this cost to build today?
That's a good question. But it would be a lot more than anybody today, I think, would tackle.
Yeah.
I think it's, the cost is just astronomical. And it was then, and it's part of the reason why it's not finished.
Right.
Upstairs was the marble. The building in and of itself is poured concrete with rebar and clad with stone that was quarried on site, which saved a lot of money.
Yes.
But everything that's inside, the expense becomes all the marble that you see.
Right.
That's what really makes it. And then Chandler had his unique touches, and he had a music room in his mansion. He had 3 lights done exactly like those there. Westview at one point in time had a cafeteria. It had its own airplane. He had his trophy room up by the water tower. They had the greenhouses. They did Christmas rides out on the ground. So they were always looking at ways to do stuff out here as well.
It sounds like that, as we've kind of highlighted, he was really trying to prove himself. He was a big kid at heart. It sounds like maybe he also wanted to be the fun brother, the fun son, different from his other brothers, but with kind of an angle of spirituality. And he was exploring a lot.
I think the spirituality came later. Of course, we can't forget that Chandler's family were Methodists, heavily involved in Emory. Some of them were bishops and all in the Methodist Church. So he certainly got that honestly. But I think from a child to adulthood, he was not the studious kid. He was not the kid. He didn't match up to his brothers. He didn't have the business sense that they had.
Sure.
And so he was always trying to find himself.
Yeah. But I think it's also fair to him in memory to conclude that although it's an incomplete legacy, it's actually a pretty cool legacy.
Thankfully he did it, or we wouldn't have it.
Yeah, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So that is remarkable, and what a special space. Well, we'd love to see the sarcophagus of Asa and hear the story. So let's parlay. It's fascinating to me that Asa Canary Jr. has his burial plot in the outdoors, but originally he had desired himself to be buried inside of course, his legacy abbey at Westview Cemetery. But here it is empty. Is that correct?
Lack of a better analogy, Westview Abbey was supposed to be his pyramid. And like a pharaoh, he was going to be buried inside. And he wanted to be in this grand sarcophagus. I can only imagine what something like this would cost in today's time. I believe it's travertine. It was carved here on the site. He was supposed to have been buried at the top, and then his second wife, Florence, on the bottom. He was going to be in grand splendor here. Rumor has it that Florence didn't really like the Abbey, never really cared for the Abbey. In some ways, maybe thought it was Chandler's full-hearted folly. So when he passed away, against the family's wishes, she had him buried outside next to his first wife, and caused some consternation in the family. And then when she passed away, she was eventually buried out there as well. But she made Westview promise not to ever sell this.
That was my next question. You read my mind.
It's supposed to be a cenotaph, so it's supposed to be just for him, So we can't do anything with it. And
right.
People ask, we've had people come in and try to buy it.
I was going to ask, you're getting any offers? Yeah.
We do get offers occasionally, but we do it out of respect for him, because he originally built the Abbey as an honor to his father.
Mm-hmm.
And the main chapel that was going to get built, which didn't get built, was going to be all named after his father and all that. And just none of that happened. He ran into issues, but
is there any research that you've done that shows a real intimate, reflective type of Asa Jr. where he's really bemoaning a sadness about this place? And have you gotten that?
And I'm sure Chandler had a lot of regrets on a lot of things. He had issues. He ran into issues with the government here, the state of Georgia. They purposely wouldn't allow him to operate the funeral home and mortuary that they were going to build here. Even though a mortician moved onto the property, but was never allowed to work. And it was because he angered so many people. He had a lot of money, so he made some enemies, and because of that, they forced some laws against him. So I think at that point in time, I'm sure there was some sadness.
Yeah, sure.
What those truly were, I don't know.
Fair enough.
There's a glimpse in some of his writings, but I don't know how much of that is PR based as opposed to what he actually thinks.
I get you. Well, nonetheless, it's a very Pharaoh-esque sarcophagus here for or cenotaph for Asa Canary Jr. And I love the stylized, I guess, lotus leaves there running around the frieze. So, very, very Egyptian. Wonderful. We're on one of the lower levels, or how would you describe this? Was this first floor? Basement?
First floor. I would never say basement.
Never basement, yeah.
First floor or lower floor.
That's not good marketing at all.
Exactly.
So, in the Abbey, which has over 11,000 interments?
They're not interments. So
Okay.
When it was built for 11,444 crypt spaces. There's about 9,000 used, give or take. So we still have quite a few on the third floor. Now, there's a lot of columbarium in here as well. So that number doesn't include spaces for ashes. And of course, you can have these spaces and put ashes in them.
Sure. Even though they're like outfitted for a casket or whatever, right? Yeah. And so what else would you like to talk about in this realm of the building?
It's just interesting. Money is everything always. So you pay for different spots. So just like out on the grounds, you get in the historic sections or the more ornate sections, the lots are more expensive. The same sort of principle operated here. If you're on the chapel level, you had all 35 different types of marble and all of that. And it was marketed towards people that had a certain amount of means.
Sure.
But they wanted to make a community mausoleum for the community. So down here, they did terrazzo floor. They did the white Alabama marble as well, and just a lower price point so that people could afford it.
Well, yeah, it's still, absolutely lovely. So it's still heavenly.
An incredible building.
Yeah, it is. We are now in a part of the Abbey that was really, are we calling it residential to Asa? His apartment?
So it was not his apartment. There was an apartment here on this side, which was for the mortician.
Okay.
But what this side was used for was Chandler wanted Westview to be a one-stop shop. So in the 1940s, they bought funeral homes as well. So and an ambulance service. So he owned an ambulance service, a funeral service, and he was going to close down the funeral homes on Peachtree Street, which were Westview funeral homes, and was going to move them out here. So the ambulance was going to pick you up. It was going to bring you out here. It was going to bring you in downstairs in the garage. There was going to be a mortuary on site. They would take you upstairs here into the mortuary room. It was fitted out with tables. The mortician lived up there. They would dress your body, and you would come back down this elevator, and this would be the viewing.
Wow.
The wake would be in here. So
I see.
Family viewing. So this is the family room. And they would put the casket in front of this window over here, which looked out over a lake.
Wow.
Chandler, when he started, got into all that legal trouble and started pulling back money. He never finished this building as intended. So
I see.
The elevator was never put in. A lot of the upstairs was never finished as well.
Yeah.
But this was supposed to be a one-stop shop. And then what happened is when you did the viewing in here, the family would go across into the chapel. Then they would take the body in the elevator downstairs, tunnel it, or take it through the tunnel underground, bring it up the elevator and into the chapel that way.
Fascinating. Wow. It's like a whole kind of behind the scenes ritualism.
Right.
I love
It
it.
just never came to fruition because Chandler angered people and the state of Georgia said, we're not going to let you run a mortuary and all that.
Right. It's kind of like the right vision, but the timing and other things. Absolutely. Wow. So, Jeff, we are inside of Asa Canary Jr.'s actual office, inside of the Abbey here at Westview Cemetery, with these extraordinary plaster ceilings which run concurrent through some of these rooms for the secretary and others. But what are some thoughts that come to mind about, Asa's operations here, or who hung out here, kind of thing?
I think it's a lot of it's unfulfilled dreams.
Okay.
So again, this side of the building was right at the tail end. They never finished the wainscoting up the staircases. They never installed the elevator. They never put the stained glass windows in this building and all, which all had been drawn out and planned and scheduled. Chandler built these 3 offices with the staff ceiling, but the fact that he actually worked here that often, no.
Yeah, not a lot of time spent here.
Because at that point, he was at the end of his life. He was in a lot of trouble legally, and he was also selling the cemetery to the 3 guys from D.C.
Gotcha.
Before the Bowen family bought it. And so, for me, it's what it could have been, is what it represents to me. I mean, it's beautiful, like the staff ceiling.
Oh, yeah.
The walnut walls are incredible. But it also reminds me of how much the building wasn't finished.
Yeah.
Actually done.
Yeah, just this kind of stepping back in time here with sconces and the thermostat. I mean, it's very period, kind of just frozen in time.
And the whole Abbey complex. Again, the chapel, the Florence Cannon Chapel, was the second chapel. There was going to be one 3 times that size.
Yeah.
Up front, which was never done. So.
Wow, it's fascinating.
Says to the stained glass windows installed here, and it never actually was. And so then it worked out for sales as well. So you had 5 sales offices, which this is the arches above the driveway to that. And then it went to that.
I see.
And then there was an apartment over here. This was office space. But then this was the mortician's space. And nothing's been done in here in a long time, but this was fitted out with the mortician tables. So you can actually see the plug with where the drainage would have been for the mortician space as well. So there was a table here and a table on the other side.
Sure.
It was fitted out, but then the mortician moved in and then moved out a month later. It was never allowed to operate here. And so you can see the pedals on the mortician table as well. So never used for mortician purposes.
Fantastic. Well, whoever, got to utilize it had a good view.
Yeah.
But I love some of the original furnishings, and I mean, that wheelchair is just a classic. Wow. That architect's desk. Are any of the chemicals related, or no, just some? This is it. Oh, yeah.
Just all art stuff.
Neat. That's a beautiful desk. I've got a vintage architect's desk in my house. I love it. Wow.
They do a lot of drafting out here on site and did all their plans too, because we have all the plans of the ceiling for the 3rd chapel they were in.
Yeah.
We have plans for this whole building. They just were never instituted.
That's amazing. It's amazing.
Coding, sorry, and all that.
What could have been.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the mortician lived here about a month.
There you go. That's some period of time, obviously, right? Yeah.
We've got the sales record. He sold off all the equipment a month after they installed it.
Wow.
To somebody in North Georgia.
Well, I can't say that I've visited such a unique mortician's room before, even if it was only a month.
It was that one-stop shop. I mean, the ambulance would get you, bring you out here, they embalm your body.
Smart concept, really smart concept.
And then when they put you on the ground, you had flowers, so they would do flowers for the next 50 years.
Incredible. So. Well, let's check out the tunnel. We're kind of in the belly of the beast down here in the tunnel that would have been utilized for moving the bodies from. We'll call it the wake room, family room, and then into the chapel.
All right, it's especially brought this tunnel up the elevator and taken into the chapel on the stairs. So
okay.
You can see the body from the family side to the chapel side.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
Adds a little mystery.
Adds a little mystery. Wasn't used the whole lot. That, again, the family side was never completed.
Yeah.
But what it was used for in the 1960s during the Cuban Missile Crisis, Westview became a fallout shelter for the city of Clemens. So this tunnel on the bottom floor of the Abbey were sanctioned as official fallout shelters.
Interesting.
So we have all the paperwork and signage and things like that.
What would have been the capacity on that? Do you know?
I do not know off the top of my head.
Yeah.
It's around 75.
75. Okay.
Not a lot.
Right. And beautiful. Cool. Very interesting. Possibly the most eccentric ornate side, to say the least, of the Abbey at Westview Cemetery is this facing side of the cemetery interior. And do you have a name for it yourself, or is there an official name?
There is so it's actually officially the East Loggia. But most people think this is the front of the Abbey. It is not, was not intended to be. It's intended to be the eastern facade. But the style that you see here for this building in the southeast is very unusual. It's Spanish Plateresque architecture, which simply translates to in Spanish in the way of the silversmith. So all the intricate details were supposed to mimic that of fancy knives and forks and plates, things of that nature.
I can see that.
Now, what they do with PR is when they started building this in the 40s, they said, oh, it's the 400th anniversary of Ferdinand de Soto's discovering this part of the country, which is all a bunch of hogwash. Chandler had been out in California. He had the architecture, Clarence Lee J. And Cecil Bryan, the builder and the designer. This was very similar to what you would find out in California.
Gotcha.
Same kind of plans, just done on a different scale.
Right.
But if you were to look at this front, again, it's all poured concrete made to look like a faux limestone.
Incredible work.
Up at the top, you have the 4 state of Georgia seals. Then down below, you have the 4 city of Atlanta seals. And then in the middle, you've got WA for Westview Abbey.
Sure.
There's some tile work also on the building. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah, the tile work, is that sort of later? Is that
Yep.
post World War II, or is that the period?
It was all that time. So what he did is he hired a Belgian artist who was out of California to paint all these paintings. He approved them or didn't approve them. Then they got sent to California to the McBean Tile Company, and they were fabricated there and then brought here and put up in place. So we have all the details that shows like tile 1 where it goes.
Interesting.
Yeah. So he didn't like some of the smiles on Jesus, so he had the guy redo it. And all that. But you're Chandler. You're Asa Canary
That's
Jr.
it. That's it.
But yeah, it
And-
was all done at the same time.
And do you feel like in some of these apses, again, they had maybe urns, or they were just here to...
Not down here.
Not here,
I
not
don't
here.
believe so. The receiving vault, yes, but here, no.
Did Asa have a personal favorite aspect of the whole Abbey building or the cemetery? Was this, I mean, this is obviously the showcasing side, you know?
This was his showcase. I think, he certainly loved this later on. He, before that, loved his trophy room where he had all his animals. But I think the cemetery in and of itself, it was for him to try to make a lasting impression. And it's kind of tongue-in-cheek because he's eccentric a little, out there, and people thought he was nuts for doing this. And while some might have said it was foolhardy, we still talking about it. We still have it. And it is because of him that we have this, and we're still talking about all this. So,
oh, yes.
I like to say it's the house that Coke built.
Aha. Wow. Well, last but not least, Jeff, I want to head back to the main contemporary office today and talk a little bit about the fascinating record keeping of Westview and a couple other things.
Okay.
So thank you. Thanks. We're really down here where the researchers like to hang out the most, in the archives, where we've got some great big old Victorian books and early 20th century books. And you made a really fascinating statement to me in that Westview throws away nothing, and you have a complete record keeping collection of the entire cemetery history, and even before that with some of the deeds to the farmland that was here. That's pretty amazing, because when I think of like Bonaventure Cemetery in Savannah, they've lost over half the records to fire and flood. And I find that at every turn with old cemeteries where the records are just gone for a lot of different reasons, and fire and flood are the bad words. So what a blessing. And
it's a blessing. We lost, the one thing we don't have is historical photographs.
Okay.
And they were destroyed by water damage at the administration building. But thankfully, all of our records, we have records to every single person. It's the first burial here in October 9th, 1884 and on.
Wow.
That's for the main section, the historical African-American section, the pauper section. We have all those records.
Amazing.
And we know where everybody's at. It's all in a grid system.
Yeah.
Even 130 years later, you can go out and find one grid post. You can walk off 8 feet and find and triangulate where everybody's at. So we have about 10,000 people on the property that do not have markers. So just because there's not a marker doesn't necessarily mean someone's not buried.
So, for example, with Cruz's granddaughter coming out here, I mean, what a blessing for her, because you could actually at least point to the spot. So I'm sure that a lot of researchers and family and others praise, the fact, right, that you have these records. I mean, does become a blessing, right?
It's a blessing. You know, we've been very fortunate. We
Yeah.
haven't lost them. I mean, 1884, and we've got all the records. I mean,
Yeah.
every single one.
Yeah.
Down to receipts given to individuals in 1884 for whatever the case is. We have our board of director meeting minutes from 1884. So,
Wow.
it's a remarkable archive of stuff. And unlike Oakland here, who has lost a lot of their records,
Yeah, sure.
we've got. It's remarkable that it's still intact.
Yeah.
Finally getting backed up on computer and some of that.
It's a lifetime worth of work. And you mentioned that some of the documents that we're looking at up here on top of the file cabinets are some of the unfinished or the plans that were never completed for the Abbey and other elements.
Everything from down to where the wainscoting should go, to where the stained glass windows should go, to what in the larger of the 3 chapels that was never built, what the actual staff ceiling was supposed to look like, and actual life-size drawings of those staff ceilings as well. So if we had somebody with $100 million that wants to donate, we could possibly theoretically build that chapel out. We've got all the plans.
Sure. Well,
Pretty crazy.
never say never. Well, what a cool archive. Thanks for giving us a little tour, little peek. Well, Jeff, it has been such an honor and a treat and just a special day to spend time with you and have you really give us the grand tour of Westview Cemetery in Atlanta. So thank you so much. I think you're an inspiration to everybody, and your book about Westview Cemetery has been an inspiration to me and so many others, and will continue to be that. So I would be honored if you would actually autograph my copy of the book, and I hope everyone considers ordering it, of course.
Yeah.
And where can they find your book?
You can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere.
Under Jeff Clemmons, right? Absolutely.
Just tell me what's better than Ambien, puts you right to sleep. So if you need any help, just order a copy.
That's awesome.
But yeah, thank you all for coming out here.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
You come out here and you see this empty grass, and you think it's that.
Sure.
I thought he was running straight to. I was like, are we going to have a camera?
He's following us.
Okay, good.